Hey everybody, Alan here, and it's the next morning, and this bench is complete, all nailed in and ready to go. And I've decided to put the bald cypress fusion technique trees on this bench, and that may be temporarily, but I need to move them because they take up a lot of space, and I think they'll fit on this bench beautifully. And then, of course, I can move the other plants that are on the really old, nasty bench that will also then be replaced. And then I'll have so much more room to decide where to put things. So that's the next step, is to get all of the bald cypress fusion technique trees. And there's about 25, maybe. About 75% are in 8-inch bulb pans, and about 25% are in 6-inch bulb pans. So that's the next step. So the bald cypress are all moved, and I was completely wrong because I thought some of them were in 6-inch pots. It turns out that the 6-inch pots were the singles that I ended up putting into the ground. So they are all actually in 8-inch pots, except for this one 6-inch pot. But as you can see, this is just 4 trees that are just individually growing. They are not fusion. If we look here, you can see they have not been tied together like all the rest of them. And I have this one in a 10-inch pot, and it is also not a fusion. It's just 2 trees growing independently of each other. But what is really cool is that this guy here has begun to buttress. I mean, is that cool? A 1.5-year old seedling. This is by far the biggest tree that I have of all of them, even the ones I put in the ground. And it's already beginning to buttress, so that is so cool. And then I have one in a very, very old bulb pan. And plastic, as it ages, especially the sunshine in Florida, can really age things quickly. It begins to crack apart. This pot here is a little more of a decorative thing. It's still considered an 8-inch bulb pan, but this is the tree, this is the pot that I purchased my Fukian tea. It was January of this year. I purchased a Fukian tea, brought it home, and immediately put it into a bigger pot to grow it on to take cuttings, and I'm very close to doing that very soon. And then this is also a bulb pan. A little bit different than these typical ones. This is what Jim Smith used. Jim Smith was my mentor. He was my inspiration. He had an unbelievable bonsai collection, but every single tree that he grew in his wholesale nursery as a pre-bonsai was in a bulb pan like this. This pan is more reminiscent of a nursery can that you buy, like a 3-inch. So if we go over here, you know, something like these guys. This is your typical plastic 3-gallon pot, which are actually full of rocks that I had to move to fix the bench. So the only 6-inch is not a fusion. And if we look at these fusions, I pulled one of the ties apart and it hadn't fused yet, but you know, some are a little smaller, some have fewer trees, some have more trees, some of the trees have grown much bigger, some are a little smaller, some are very symmetrical, some are somewhat lopsided. But you know what? I don't think any of that matters. They are all going to be unique. And I think that's going to be a cool part of growing these guys. So this one here, it looks like 2 or 3 of the really tiny little guys may have succumbed. So this guy here is dead. He's dead. Okay, so take him out of there. I still have 6, 8 ones that are not. So if you'll notice, I also fertilized. And this is a commercial fertilizer. You see the little blue. So I don't think it's really readily available to the public. It's a commercial fertilizer. And since I was a landscaper and a wholesale grower, I have the ability to buy that stuff still. And then the white granules is a weed preventer. So I pulled all the weeds, and then I fertilized, and then sprinkled the top with the weed preventer, pre-emergent weed preventative. And on many of these I also added a little extra soil because, well, I can't show you now because they're all buried. But on some of them, some of the fine feeder roots that were coming from, God, I can't even see. Well, here, maybe here's one right here. If you see that little tiny feeder root right there, some of them had a whole bunch that were exposed. Here's another one where the feeder roots are exposed right there. You see them right there, those two little guys. So I wanted to cover those up. So that was the process. Bring them over here. Add a little bit of soil to the ones that I thought needed it. And then fertilize and apply the weed preventative. And if we look, there's a whole bunch more bench left. I would say, just eyeballing it, probably half. And I've got them all jammed together, but they were growing jammed together on the other bench. The one probably drawback of them being here is that the back row is up against the fence. So they're not going to be happy with that. But I think this is just temporary. I've got to get all the other trees off of the really crusty wood in order to remove that wood and completely refurbish those benches. And that would give me so much more space. And I'm thinking pretty much that these guys will go back where they were. So I think I'm going to end this video just right now. And then go work on the other part. Or should I just continue on? Maybe I'll just continue on. If we were in court, the jury should disregard that last statement. I also wanted to show you a very interesting phenomenon on the portion of the bench where the bald cypress just came from. And as you can see from the silhouette of the old pots, they were jammed together pretty much. But the two planks in the middle were older, and look how much more water they've absorbed versus the brand new plank. And they were all sanded, and they were all given water seal. But you can see, especially here, where the water has just seeped into the wood and now it's making algae. And of course, I'm keeping these bald cypress very wet because they need to be wet. A couple of times I've attempted to, wait for the rain. Yeah, good luck with that. I've been doing bonsai way too long to, relying on future rain means your trees have dried up. So they dried up, and I came out. I usually water about noon to see just where we're at, especially like, is it going to rain or has it rained? And then, what needs water. I have like indicator plants, and the bald cypress are one of them. See, all the tops are all just wilted. So these guys get a lot of water. So my plan for this portion of the bench is to let it completely dry, which will only take one day. We're still too early in the morning for the sun to really be blasting down on this, but it will. And it will be in full sun for, 6 or 8 hours, which should be all it needs. I may actually clean up some of this soil to make sure that, get rid of that dirt, sweep up that dirt to make sure that the sun can dry out the bench. And then I'll retreat it. It's interesting because these guys over here, portulacaris mostly, and a couple of ficus that don't need a tremendous amount of water. Those old benches have not absorbed any kind of water because they just don't get the amount of water that the bald cypress were getting. And then here we are with the crusty, oh my God, look at this. This is so worn out that it has bonsai soil in the crevice. And there's so many Portulacaria jade here. I don't want to send them over to the other bench. You know what I could do? I have an Iliagnus bonsai that I'm actually loving, and it's growing beautifully. But I took some cuttings of the Iliagnus, and I got pretty good percentage. So here are the Iliagnus. This is the largest one, and it has such a beautiful sweep already. I'm thinking very seriously of giving it kind of a gentle sweep, bring one of these branches down here as the first main branch, and turning it into, instant bonsai. And some were smaller, and the trees are still smaller. But if I take all of these Iliagnus, and this is also an old crusty bench that is not as bad, by far the biggest priority is this wood here is just so bad. So I could take all these Iliagnus and put them in front of the bald cypress and do the same thing with them. Pull the weeds, fertilize, and some of these have some exposed roots that I don't want. I want to expose the roots when I'm ready to expose the roots, but they're too young yet to really have exposed roots. So give them just a very small layer of soil, fertilize, and apply the weed preventative. And none of these guys have ever been trimmed. They were rooted as cuttings. When the cuttings had rooted sufficiently, they were then put into different sized pots depending on how big the cutting was. So the biggest cuttings got 8-inch bulb pans, and there's 4 of them. One hiding in the back over there. And then there's 3 and 6-inch bulb pans. And there's actually 3 more in old fruit containers. Mushrooms, or some kind of berries or something. I think they're mushrooms. And you just poke holes in the bottom, and it's a perfect little training pot. So that's what I think the next step is to take these Iliagnus over in front of the bald cypress. And then I can take the Portulacaria and put them all. See, here's one right here. He's already there. So that will give me a lot of space on this bench. Oh yes, I also have some gigantic ilex shillings that I have yet to even feature on the channel because they just don't even know what to do with them. I'm giving them a couple of years before they actually need some work. Let them recover from being dug out of the ground. So that's the next step. Iliagnus over to the other bench. The Iliagnus have joined the bald cypress, and they've also had, if they needed it, a little extra soil added to the surface to raise it up to keep the roots from being too exposed, and then a dose of that commercial fertilizer, the little blue dots, and then sprinkled with the pre-emergent weed killer. And they only took about half of what was left of the bench, so I still have space. So what else should I put over here? Anyway, you get the drill. It's kind of like you got to move this to move that, to put that, to then have the space to take the old wood off, to put the new wood, blah, 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 blah. But it's getting there. And I'm going to be so happy to finally be rid of that old crusty wood and have a whole brand new fresh start. And that will give me so much more space. So now I'm going to end this video. Of course, I say that, and now I'm going to talk some more. Because I wanted to talk about the Iliagnus. You see, some of them are quite small, and they're fairly straight, but the vast majority of them have a very nice, gentle curve, especially the larger ones. And I don't have 20 years to wait for these guys to get 2 inches across, because they will. I probably could go dig up some 20-year-old ones. But especially the largest one, it just has such a beautiful sweep. I am really thinking very seriously of taking most of them, perhaps if not all, and turning them into very thin, graceful, feminine trunk bonsai. And if that does happen, it will be winter, because Elaeagnus are a temperate plant that goes dormant, even though they're an evergreen. They don't drop their leaves, but they do go dormant in the winter, and that's really the only time to do any kind of major root pruning that will be necessary to turn them into bonsai. And I think I already said it, but these guys have never been cut back. They were rooted as cuttings. The cuttings were placed in the pots based on how big the cutting was, and then they've been allowed to grow. So you see this guy here, he's just shooting way up from down here. He's probably, 16 inches high? Never pruned them, never trimmed them, never done anything with them, just letting them grow. And that's a big part of what I do with seedlings like this, or cuttings, young trees. Let them grow. Just let them take off, do whatever they want. Now, with the large one, I'm already seeing some structure. I'm seeing, okay, I could take this branch, and then I could bring this branch, and this branch would be, and so I'm planning on the styling. Even though it's June now, so we're talking at least 6 months, probably more like 7 months, the end of January, somewhere in there. And yet I can still plan, I can still look, I can see, okay, I want this branch, I don't want this branch, but I don't have to take that stuff off. These guys don't produce massive trunks, except over a long period of time. So why not just leave as much on as you can to get as thick a trunk as you can, even though I just said I'm not waiting 20 years to get huge trunks. So there you go. Elaeagnus, interestingly enough, are now illegal to grow commercially because they've been determined to be an invasive exotic. Animals eat the seed, which is edible even for humans. They don't taste like much, but and they've now been found in the wild, so let's make something illegal that's been a landscape plant for 70 years, and there's millions of them all over the place in hedges in front of commercial buildings, but we're now going to make it illegal. You can't grow them anymore. Sounds like typical humans. So, thank you so much for watching. If you're curious to see what these guys look like as lacy feminine bonsai in 6 months, subscribe and hit the notification bell, and believe me, 6 months will go past faster than I ever imagined. Time just seems to be flying the older I get. So anyway, it'll be here before you know it. So thanks for watching, and I will see you hopefully before 6 months.